So there was like a lot going on, and suddenly it was just like, I don't know if we can publish this.
Hello and welcome
back to Fontroversy.
Oh, you go.
You go.
No. Well, welcome to Did I Do That and Fontroversy? It's a podcast about making graphic design and making mistakes because it's all part of the process, but it's also a different podcast.
And it's all about fonts that just aren't quite our type.
I'm one of your hosts, Sean Schumacher.
And I'm one of your other hosts, Lena Hall.
This... We've made this as confusing as possible.
Is this a retake?
I don't know. I don't know. Let's just roll with it. So because this is a weird one. This is a podcast that's sort of about making podcasts a little bit.
It's a podcast about making podcasts. It's a very meta podcast.
It's a very meta podcast because it's it is a podcast about a project that was about learning how to sort of talk about design in public through podcasting.
Yes.
And sort of a retrospective. But I feel like I should also introduce you because there are certainly probably some folks who listen to this show who may not have heard those Fontroversy.
They may hear Fontroversy and be like, what's that?
What's that?
Who's this person?
Who is that? This sounds like another thing Sean's doing that's going to distract him from making the show. But you are, to introduce you, you are a very special guest, first of all. That's important to say. All our guests are very special guests, but you are also especially a very special guest. You are probably best known to listeners of this program as the host of Fontroversy, a limited run podcast produced and created by my DES 399 class in the spring of 2023. Mm-hmm. You currently serve as a designer with A&D Projects, and you are a senior in the graphic design program here at Portland
PSU.
State. You are, of course, Lena Hall. Hi.
I'm Lena Hall.
You've already introduced
me.
yourself, but I'm saying it again.
It's for all my fans out there.
But you do have fans. This was something that we were talking about before the recording.
It weirds me out a little bit.
You have people who know you primarily from the show, which is like such a weird thing.
I've met some like sophomores and freshmen and stuff that had you at the time that we were doing the podcast. And they were doing show and tell.
Oh, yes.
And they would hear about it. And then I would meet them and I'd be like, yeah, I'm Lena. And they're like, I've heard of you. I'm like, oh, God, no. Don't perceive me. Ew.
Well, but the podcasting business is the business of being perceived, but primarily through audio.
Yeah, so it's like they see me and it's always like, oh, you're so much shorter. I thought you were going to be tall.
Well, everybody thinks that kind of thing during Zoom times too.
Yeah, I think I come off as taller than I am, but I am significantly short.
You're not that short.
I'm pretty short.
I don't think so.
I am 5'2".
Really?
I am 5'2".
Okay,
I am pretty short. I
might also be shorter than I think I am.
I always wear shoes that make me really tall.
Oh,
so there's that. I probably am 5'4" most days, but it's not natural.
You have those heels that Bart Simpson was wearing when he was trying to be Radioactive Man's sidekick. Yeah. And he's walking around with a little chihuahua and wearing the vertical striped suit. All these things. This is describing your look right now.
This is me. I'm Bart Simpson. It's me. So
it's me. I'm Bart Simpson.
Yeah, of course. His catchphrase.
Your famous catchphrase.
So I think we should, like, for people who are listening that are hearing us talk about Fontroversy, it was a class.
It was a class.
Like an experimental thing. Like, we should talk about like what it really was. Yeah, because there was a whole lot that went into that, like behind the scenes.
There is. So like, and I think probably like the place to start with that is before the class started, because I teach here at Portland State, and as part of my research, I do this project, this Did I Do That project, and part of the rationale was was like there is not really like a lot of media that is talking about the like practice of graphic design. There's like lots of media like kind of criticizing graphic design, like that sort of framework. There's lots of media talking about like the business side of graphic design, but there isn't
just like logos, brands, but like behind the scenes isn't really something you see.
There it isn't, and I feel like a lot of what we talk about in our classes is like being a graphic designer is also being an educator in a weird way, because you are often working with clients that don't know how graphic design works and how the processes need to happen. We have to learn how to explain graphic design, what we do, to people who really don't know what graphic design is. Yeah. And it's a really kind of weird term for what we do. Like, I feel like graphic design doesn't fully represent it. No. Well, I've always thought that. I think graphic design is like the fifth name this field has had like in the past century. I tell people like, oh, I'm a graphic designer. And they're like, okay, but like, what is that? Yeah. Because you hear the term thrown around, but like, who knows what it is? So, well, people hear graphic and they think, oh, we're drawing. We're doing some doodles. It's so much more than that. And I think that's like when this class was like kind of presented to us, it was like, well, what's another lens we can look at design through? Well, and that's exactly it. Like, as I was doing this project, I realized like how fundamental this thing is, like how really necessary it is to have like people learning how designers work who are outside of this field. And if this were just a podcast about, you know, design business or something like that, that's probably not going to attract as many flies to the honey, you could say. You get like exclusively like business people more than you would get designers. Exactly. And like you have to, and I think a lot of like folks who come into teaching realize this too, like you have to learn how to talk about certain things with people who aren't designers. Like if you go into a pitch meeting and you're just talking about like, and we actually just had this conversation in A&D projects like the other day, like your client's not going to understand if you're not giving like context that makes sense to them. So like in a lot of ways, when I went into like forming this class, I was trying to think of like, well, this is not just about making media. This is about learning how to talk about these subjects to people who are new to them. Yeah. And it's absolutely a thing I think I've learned in A&D projects where we do work with clients that are from different departments and stuff. Yes. Our in-house design studio. Our in-house design studio run by like students. And you have to learn how to explain everything you're doing because there's so many different little parts of a design process that it's so important to be able to like justify every little decision you make. Really and truly. And like in that class too, like we are the in-house design studio, but we are like serving exclusively like artists and art historians and folks that like are in, you know, kind of connected fields, but it's still a really different process and different way of looking at the world than they do. I've worked with like our art practice team where we're both art people, but it's two wildly different fields. The vocabulary is different. The way of looking at the world is different. So like those experiences are really, really interesting to like do because you have to learn how to talk about your subject differently than you would if you were talking to a designer. Absolutely. Very much so. Yeah. And that's like really interesting just to have as a focus to a class. So the idea of it is that we would kind of collaboratively look at this, you know, problem of like, well, how do you talk about design subjects to people who don't know design as like something that they would actually want to engage with as something that would be entertaining and fun and also like informative. And thus the name public design communication. Well, yeah. And that's something that I've been rattling around. Like we were talking about graphic design's a terrible name for this field. Like communication design is like the last name before it got this one. Communication design does make sense though. But I feel like better in a lot of ways because it's like it's not just like graphics. It's we're making messages. That's the point. Like this is not art. This is a different thing than art. But then for this class, it was also interesting because it was open to non-graphic design students. Well, yeah. And I think that was really important to me because I wanted to have voices in the room that can kind of check us too. Yeah. And sometimes we get a little in our own heads and we start talking as designers to designers and it's just like not an accessible thing for everyone because it's very niche and sometimes it's like, oh, you have to know it just to understand. And it's like, how can we present the stuff we're talking about in a way that many people will be able to relate to? Yes. So this class went on the books in spring of 2023, open to all majors. And I really like went at it with and I've done a couple classes like this before, but really like the framework of like, we are going to build this thing together. Like I did not have a predetermined project other than podcast.
Yeah.
Because we had tool to make podcast, which was room. Room with microphones.
Room with closet with microphones.
We quickly learned not enough microphones.
Not enough microphones, not enough room.
Oh, not enough oxygen in said room.
Oxygen.
All problems that arose during the recording. But like the idea was like I was going to essentially be facilitator, but not like, not like give you like prescribed instructions of like, here's our project brief and stuff like that. It's like we are going to find this thing, find how many episodes we want to generate from it. So like I think one of the first things that I gave you all was like the show formats.
Yeah.
List.
Yeah. We did like a whole thing about delving into different podcasts and what forms that they can take.
Yeah.
To kind of see like which ones we were attracted to as a class.
Which weirdly is like a competitive analysis thing if we're
kind of
like looking at it through a design lens.
And I also think like this was such an interesting concept because so many of us, we listen to podcasts.
Yeah.
We listen to a lot of different stuff. Like I'm very into like live play podcasts. I listen to a lot of like D&D stuff.
Oh, sure. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, which is a super different format than like 99% invisible.
Yes.
So like there are so many different moving parts there.
Well, and that's such a good thing to bring up because I think early on when I was trying to like break this class, I was thinking like probably the lens that we would end up using would be one that is a lot more NPR-y than this show is.
Which, I mean, NPR is the first thing I can think of listening to that would relate to what is now the podcasting field.
Absolutely. And like 99% Invisible is very much in that NPR journalism style and structure. And I think very quickly, like we were using the NPR book for this. And very quickly, like the project started to diverge and it became like, oh, actually, like there is a lot more interest in doing it this other way. And like if we're looking at this through the NPR lens, it doesn't work at all. You can't do it that way.
And then it kind of moved to like these initial pitches we were making. A lot of them were doing some kind of game show. Yeah.
So we should talk about the pitches. So after I threw out the format, we started to work through like, well, okay, what kinds of show could you do?
Yeah.
And so people took those and they ran with them. And you actually have the pitches.
I have the pitches up. We had 4 pitches.
Yes. Broken into teams.
I think a lot of them were kind of in the same idea. Like a lot of us were on the same page of what we possibly wanted to do with just different approaches. So our first one I have here is called Not Designers Also Welcome.
Yes, which is probably like the most descriptive of the project overall.
Yes, absolutely. So their definition of it is a podcast that centers on interviewing non-designers and filling in the gap between what we know and what they know. And kind of like that knowledge exchange of what we as designers understand and what non-designers understand of like what we do.
What fascinated me too was when I was trying to break this class, I was trying to think of, well, what potential pitches could it be? That was like basically one of the things that was in my list.
I love that concept.
It's a really interesting concept because I think we don't often get to talk about design from an outsider's perspective. Like when you're talking about like, well, who is this story from or about? It is often like from, if we're talking about like the creative field, it's from like the art directors or the creative director, like the people who are like making the thing and not from the audience. And even like stuff like 99% Invisible, like it's talking about it from like the, kind of academic perspectives rather than like who are the people using it.
I remember really vividly when I started this class, I was with my sister and I was telling her about it. And she just was like, but who's going to listen to that? I'm like, well, I mean, designers. And she's like, well, is that your only audience?
Well, but I think that's like a really good note because I think it's something to really be conscious of, like in going into any project is like, who are you making this for?
Yeah. And that was before we really started moving towards what the end goal was.
Yeah.
And that was like a really interesting thing she brought up to me that I was like, oh yeah, who's gonna listen to this?
Yeah.
Like, who are we doing this towards? Which I think the end product of Fontroversy was really fun in just talking about fonts most people know.
Like, it was such an accessible idea.
My mom likes it.
But like, I think we should go through the other pitches, because what is fascinating is Fontroversy is not in those pitches.
No, it's not. It changed so much. So our next one that we have is just called The Actual Play.
Yeah.
And it is like a game show of designer versus non-designer.
Was this the team that you were on?
No.
Okay.
I think this one and my team were very similar.
Yes.
So their description of it is live design sprint, which for those who don't know, a design sprint is kind of like a quick moving, or how would you describe it?
Well, you are essentially given, I mean, it really comes from like the product design world, where you are given like a problem and you have to ideate and come up with like a really quick on the fly solution. It's often like part of a larger process where that then gets built out. And
it's I feel like it's really good for just like not getting in your head too much and just getting all your thoughts out.
Yeah, absolutely.
And when we mean quick, like for a sprint, it is literally, we do them in like 30 minutes.
Yeah, especially like the ones we often start A&D projects with the design sprint.
It's a great icebreaker. I think it's a great icebreaker, just to like, instead of what's everybody's name, like we're gonna put you people together. You might not know each other. Now come up with an idea.
Yeah, come up with an idea that can help the school in some way that doesn't cost us $1 million.
Like, what do you think is needed? What's a problem you want to solve?
It's of course having a championship of different flavors of chips.
Different flavors of chips.
Which is the one that won this
That is a legitimate thing that is happening. Or
this is a normal class I teach, folks. I promise you.
Or disco
Real
bench.
things happen in it.
Remember disco bench?
I do remember disco bench.
That was a design sprint where they wanted to make a bench look like a disco ball.
Well, I think the original idea was draw attention to the benches that were in the parking lot, and then I think like the day after we had that, some facilities people came and
down the bench.
Demolished the entire parking lot.
It really
cut down all the trees.
It was so sad.
Yeah, it was really weird.
So this next pitch is called "What the Hell is Going On?" Dissent and Design.
Oh yes.
Which again, I would love to see this as a podcast.
Yeah, because like all of these are like lenses of looking at design that I feel like are not out there really.
So their definition of this is: design trends historically have been a response to current events, and their podcast aims to explore these trends in historical and modern contexts. Which I think was very different from all the other pitches we have.
It's definitely like the most like, traditional NPR style journalism, podcast. But it's also like touching on subjects that I feel like, like are very in the now.
Yeah. Design is social commentary. And I think looking at like different eras of design through what was going on is just like so important.
Yeah.
And I mean, I know in Breyer's design history class that we have at PSU.
Yeah, the great Breyer Levitt, past guest of this show, and also like, kind of world-renowned design historian.
Amazing designer, amazing design historian, amazing teacher. And there's a class we take about the history of design. And it's really like this, where you're looking at what designs were going on as a response to like world events.
Yeah.
And some of the examples they have here are history of fonts and their use in political propaganda, which is like, oh my God, you could go on for so long about that.
Like that could be a 3-hour long episode.
That was my AP art portfolio in high school.
Really?
I did propaganda.
Hey.
Yeah. Yeah, it was, which is like crazy because it's kind of led to where I am now. Like I was a fine arts.
You make propaganda now.
I was a fine arts student.
You make pro PSU propaganda.
Sure.
Yeah.
I make weird photos of like what's the one I made, the SpongeBob fish. Like leaned over with a ton of lens flare all over it. Yeah, I'm a graphic designer.
You draw 1 million cats.
I draw
to
so
get people
many
involved
cats.
in mentorship.
I love that so much. Resurgence of nostalgia is one of their other examples among millennials and Gen Z during the pandemic.
Yeah. But I think they're like almost the interesting thing is like reminding people that like what is nostalgic is like this weird window that's always shifting, and like
because
there's so much 50s nostalgia in the 80s because that's like 80s kids looking back at like what they barely remember from their childhood or their late parents.
Yeah, like
wait, no.
Oh, no.
Their late parents.
I'm a Gen Zer. I'm a 2000s Gen Zer. And a lot of people my age are like, oh yeah, nostalgia for the 90s. It's like, you weren't alive.
No.
Like, I kind of get it, but it's that, like, I feel like there's just the 30 years. Like, if whatever decade you're in, the nostalgia is going to be for 30 years before that.
It will be. And like, this is also, I mean, I will say, I think this is a lot more like late 90s, early 2000s nostalgia than it is 90s.
Yeah, definitely. Like that Y2K aesthetic.
That Backstreet Boys album aesthetic.
Yeah, of course. One of their other examples is also cringecore. And what does it say about our world? And I just have to, I have to acknowledge that one because I love cringecore. And then we have one more pitch, and this is what ended up being Fontroversy.
Kind of.
It was the pitch that we went with.
Yeah.
And it changed drastically.
And it also got merged in with one of the others.
It got merged in with one of the others for a moment that was never actually produced. Like, we never actually ended up going with the merged version
I wrote
of it.
things for it. We just never ended up recording it.
We never did it. So this one has a really catchy name. An explainer / creative sprint podcast that highlights exactly what creatives can't stand and why, then puts them on the spot to try to make it work. Isn't that such a catchy name?
Yeah, it rolls off the tongue. Absolutely.
It's described as creatives from various backgrounds, students or professionals, recount an example of something particularly frustrating to them they've come across in their field. It could be a little annoyance, major difficulty, or something they just flat out can't stand and why. Then they make something with that in mind on the spot, and maybe they won't hate. That's exactly what it said. Maybe they won't hate.
Maybe they won't hate.
Yeah.
We all know that we will hate everything we make, though. That cannot be avoided.
When you look at something long enough, you're gonna hate it.
It's
true. And we're gonna be looking at our work for hours.
Yes.
So eventually you will hate it.
So basically everything in this class went to votes. Like I'm not making these calls at any point. This is like
it was a very communal decision.
Yeah. And that one won the most votes. And the actual play one was like the second runner up. And I think we all kind of identify that there's some crossover in that idea.
They were very similar pitches. And in some ways, like the idea of the non-designer and designer talking about that, which actually never ended up happening. But that was kind of part of both of those pitches.
And we then went into the stage of like, okay, so we have a framework for an idea. How do we make it into a thing? And that was a lot of interesting workshopping because the thing that you described is not the thing that's Fontroversy.
No,
like, even remotely.
We knew we wanted to talk about design that we didn't like. Some of the examples on this pitch were 80s editing style of drums they can't stand. Think Phil Collins in the Air Tonight, which I remember that being a very big topic I could not disagree with that more because the drums in that song I love.
They're so very digital.
And then graphic designer discusses some part of graphic design they really don't like and why. I believe the person who made this deck was not a graphic designer.
Yes.
So they were an audio engineer, so they were like really specific with their example. And then graphic designer doesn't like graphic design. And I just think that's really funny.
There's nothing graphic designers like less than graphic design.
True.
It's true.
That one thing stuck. Like, we want to talk about things that we don't really like.
Yeah, and in talking through the ideas, like, I think we were struggling, well, how do you translate the making process into something that is compelling audio-wise? Because I think we all very quickly realized that...
How do we make this interesting? Making
is not the most... It's barely visual, and it's nothing audio.
Nope. And it's like, if we ended up doing that, it would just be a lot of like, this looks bad.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be a lot of kind of just listening to someone kind of have like a breakdown.
Yes.
Which it's compelling in its own way. And I've certainly had ideas along those lines. Much of this show is that, if we really get down to it.
My design process definitely consists of a lot of just me like making like weird noises just because I'm so frustrated. I'll just yell.
So you're sort of your own Ben Burt is the thing.
Yes.
You're Ben Burting your design process.
Yeah. Sometimes you just need to like get out all your frustrations in a good little good little yell.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
My roommate can vouch for that. It's probably really annoying for her. So we ended up going with that pitch, but we also kind of combined it with the actual play one because we were like, we like the idea of doing this design sprint thing, but it's not going to be interesting to listen to.
No.
So can we make it a game?
Yes. And I like as someone who has probably listened to more hours of like Comedy Bang Bang than maybe I've been alive. Like the idea, especially the old Comedy Bang Bangs, you'd end with a game.
Mm-hmm.
And like that's also just a fun way to like, okay, let's ease it down. And then there's this structure that's in place. So like that's sort of the genesis of how that ended up becoming
Genesis Phil Collins.
I can hear it in the air tonight. So the idea that we go into is like we are bringing someone in as a guest and they are going to talk about something that they hate. And the host, essentially this research team that's consisting of people in the class, are going to try to make the argument to convince that person not to hate the thing.
Yeah.
And then we close with like a fun game. And that's pretty much what we broke as the initial show.
And it kind of slowly changed where initially it wasn't going to be only graphic design related. It was going to be like other creative fields, like we were saying with Phil Collins in the air tonight.
Yes.
But the class was mostly graphic designers.
Well, and the goal, I will say too, I did bring this up, like the goal was to talk about graphic design. So like that was, I think, one place where I did put my hand on the wheel in a strong way. Like,
it's also something we are all so passionate about.
Yeah.
I think we knew it was just going to make for more interesting listening because you could tell we were passionate about it. So that slowly became like fonts.
Yeah.
Every designer has such strong opinions on fonts.
It's very strong opinions.
We all have incredibly strong opinions. So let's talk about fonts that we don't like.
Well, yeah. And it's also like, it's not just us. It's everybody.
It's everybody.
You know, like just before this recording, I was sent I think it was originally a TikTok, but it was sent to me as an Instagram reel. But like it was, somebody who was just, kind of doing essentially a sketch about, different
I know exactly which one you're talking about.
It probably is the same one because I think that one's really racking up the views.
I saw that one about the new Aptos thing.
It's that same creator. Yeah. But like that is something that I think is on a lot of people's minds because like fonts are part of a conversation that is public in a way that they weren't before computers.
Yeah, fonts are communication.
Yeah.
That is how even if you're not noticing all the time, you're texting something on your phone, that font that you're texting with was chosen for a reason.
Yeah. I think when people talk about design, sometimes they'll talk about Apple, but I think like they would, which is always a weird choice. If anyone from Apple is listening to this, I love your platform and I love your services, and please don't
sponsor us.
Yeah, please don't hurt me in the search results or anything like that.
I mean, we're designers. We live on Apple.
Yeah.
So,
Apple Podcasts, of course, the best platform, unless you're listening to this on Spotify or one of the others.
Pandora.
I love that one more. But yeah, like like that is like a particular I think entry point that people have to the idea of design. But then like everyone can name a font though.
Everyone can name a font. I mean, even if your only experience with fonts is on Microsoft Word.
And I think like fonts are like, because I think the other weird genesis of this project is like there had been another city that had hired a graphic designer, and the story was like, oh, this city spent $50,000 on a graphic design and all they did was change the font. And those are so putrid, those stories.
Yeah, there's
because that's also so cheap for any design.
There is so much thought that goes into anyone who isn't a graphic designer can definitely relate to like you're writing a paper and what font do I want to choose? Times New Roman or Calibri? Yeah. Like it's
you can name them. You can identify them even if you don't like know them very well.
And I think that's why when we were pitching this idea and we started moving to the fonts we don't like, we were thinking like, oh, what fonts could we talk about? We specifically were leaning towards fonts that we knew non-designers would know. Yeah. Or even if they didn't know it based on the name, they would see it and be like, yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, so one of the things that I have pulled up over here is like we then like broke into groups and like tried to come up with, well, what are some typefaces that people would know, but also have like interesting stories associated with them. And I brought up a couple that I did know, like, you know, I think I specifically brought up Comic Sans as
Comic Sans' whole story is like really interesting.
It's really, and you should listen to that episode if you want to hear all of it, because I think everything I talked about is in there.
There is so much to that. And there are definitely fonts that were on our list that were like, there's not really a story here.
Yeah.
Which is probably the reason why those ones didn't end up going to be an episode. Like, we specifically chose ones that we could talk about for a while because they have just like a lot of nuance around them.
Yeah, there are some that are like on this list. I'm scrolling through it where like there's not even like any discussion notes. Like they all, most of them have like some research associated with them. And then like in some cases like 15 or 20 bullet points that y'all have come up with. And then there are some, Hobo was one that was like on my list of like, I feel like that's like the classic, especially for older designers, like the font that people hate. And it's like, it didn't feel like there was a story there to that team. And, you know, maybe someday, but like,
and we do have someone here that actually do have a lot of content, but we just ended up not going with. Like, I'm noticing we had Futura.
Yeah, Futura
as a big one, and there's so much information here, but we just didn't use it.
Yeah,
but I believe we did a vote.
We did a vote.
We did a vote.
Yeah, we did a vote to kind of narrow down like which ones we ended up going with, which were Comic Sans Helvetica, Impact. Wingdings, and Gil Sans. Gil
Sans is an elusive. It's an elusive creature to us. Because,
as elusive as Robert Denby.
Yeah. Do we want to talk about that yet?
We should save that.
Yeah, let's save that.
Because I think that's a later.
There's a lot there.
Yeah. So essentially, like when we had these selected, we then like broke into teams to research them, to actually like find out what the story is and generate a story outline, kind of in the NPR style, but also a little bit different. Like I shared a couple of other outlines from podcasts that I had been shared, and podcast outlines are generally quite loose for this kind of show. Like we knew we wanted it to be conversational, and that is, you know, that's like, you don't want to script it. You don't want it to sound stilted on mic.
People do ask me, oh, you and Sean have such good repertoire with each other. How did you script that? I'm like, oh no,
that's
just how we talk.
Yeah, well, it's something. I think it's something people ask about this show too. Like this is kind of going behind the scenes on Did I Do That a lot, I'm realizing. But like the way that I make that, like you have to sit down with a person and talk for a long time before you actually get into recording.
Yeah.
Or else you don't have, like, it's like you run into someone at a bus stop and it's just like, oh, hey. It's like weird and stilted. I was not originally going to be an on mic thing too. This would have been.
We wanted you to be.
Well, yeah. So we should now talk about the pilot.
The pilot. There is the pilot. Listeners are familiar with is Comic Sans. That was not the first time we did Comic Sans.
No, it was not.
We did an entire full like hour-long episode.
I think it was maybe even
it might have been
longer
more
than that, because I think we used the entire class meeting to
and it was also we were getting the jitters out.
We were. Like, that was a shaky show.
Even if you have done this before, like you have all your experience with Did I Do That? Because it was Whitney and I.
Yeah.
We had never done this kind of I think Whitney maybe had.
Yes.
But I had never done this kind of thing before.
So you were the permanent host, and Whitney, who ended up being in that
she was the special guest
re-record episode, was the special guest who like was from the team and would like counterbalance
because
what the guest brought in.
We kind of set it up that you and I were the skeptics.
Well, I was the guest in that episode. I think that's the thing that you're forgetting. I was the temporary like outside guest who would come in with a font that I hated.
Yeah.
And
I forgot the episode started with Whitney and I bantering, and then we were like, oh, Sean, you're here.
Well, yeah, and that we like did that in part for that episode just because like we don't want to bring in somebody that's actually an outside guest for an episode we may not air.
Well, we do also need to acknowledge that this class was at 9 a.m.
Oh, yeah, we do need to talk about it. So this is 9 a.m. on a Tuesday.
9 a.m. on a Tuesday is when we would do these recordings.
Yeah.
So we were not going to be able to get any guests in. And that's something we just decided to nix real early on because it's just going to be way too difficult.
Well, and I think we realized too, like after you all were like, actually, Sean, you're kind of helpful in kind of keeping things on track a little bit.
Yeah.
I know that's weird for the listeners of this show to hear, but like that would mean that there would be 4 people on mic, which would be an actual nightmare. I think in that pilot too, my studio at the time was not set up to have 3 people in it. So I think Whitney was sitting in like
Whitney
a folding chair next to the door.
Chair on this weird mic.
With like a handheld
mic.
Yeah, it's really
you were sitting
skunky.
like at your desk and I was on a couch.
Yeah.
But also we could not have 4 people in that room, mostly because space reasons and because we learned very quickly if there were 4 people in that room, the oxygen would be used real quick.
The previous studio, which most of the recordings for this show have happened in, was a space that had no windows. It had been previously used, I think, mostly as a closet. It was, I think, if I remember right, it was 80 square feet. So it's incredible that you could even fit 3 people in it.
Yeah, it was tiny. There was a lot. Like it was there were many good things about it, but also many bad things. And it also had because it had no window, it had like no airflow. Yeah. And
the only like air that would get to it was from the parking garage. This enclosed parking garage that was just like if you go and stand in it now for 10 minutes, like I did yesterday when I was trying to cut the insulation for the window in here.
Of course.
Like you get a headache
you did that
because
in the
it's
parking garage.
Like the fumes do not leave. They can't escape.
Also, we had like a curtain over the door.
Yeah, we do.
So it was blocking any airflow that was coming through there.
Well, it was blocking airflow, but also blocking the sound through that awful hollow core door.
Yeah.
Hollow core doors. What were you doing? People who built buildings in the 1950s. What was the idea? Doors aren't that expensive.
I question every decision about everything in the art building every day.
Well, the art building, our wonderful PSU art building has been a art building for 3 different schools.
Yeah.
And if that does not like really mess up a building, I don't know what will.
I feel like it's kind of the nature of being an artist that you need to kind of have a janky building to do all your work in. I think it's just, it makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah.
And now we're in this other building that was formerly an auto body shop and a flag factory. So it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, we're new location.
Yeah, it's really improved. Sorry if you hear train sounds, everybody.
At least we can breathe.
Yeah, there's no oxygen problems in here. Yeah. It's got real ventilation and everything.
There you go. And it used to have rats.
Oh yeah, oh God, I haven't told this story yet. Now we're really getting some behind the scenes. So this space I got because it had been abandoned for many years. And we started to have rats in the building where this is. And we were like,
there were some that were very beloved by the students.
Very beloved. Those rats had an Instagram following, basically.
They did.
That beats me for sure. But the source of the rats was a bit of a mystery until someone, I believe, witnessed one of them running down the little staircase that goes up to this room and realized, oh, this is just an abandoned room that's like full of sort of the perfect conditions for rats and mold.
Yeah.
Because this room also had mold in it too.
Oh, did it really?
It sure did. Because it was, it was dark and kind of moist, and no humans had been in it in several years. Perfect conditions for rats.
Lovely.
So yeah, there was a whole long process of replacing everything in this room, and the rats have gone to heaven, but. This is the Rat Poop Studio that we're now in.
Aw, such a good name.
Rat Studios.
Rat Studios. Yeah.
Terrible.
But we were in that tiny little room, and we did this entire pilot that we listened to, and we were like, we need to do this again. Well,
like, I still think that there were a lot of really good things about that pilot. There absolutely were.
I think we didn't have the flow yet.
We did not have the flow.
And I think when we came in again, because we didn't, for the next episode, it wasn't the retake of Comic Sans yet. We actually did it for a different episode. But that one we were like, I kind of just felt like, oh, this makes more sense to me.
Well, it also showed, because I think one of the biggest takeaways was like, we had to do so many starts and stops with that episode because I think we realized that research was like kind of incomplete. It was kind of like a little bit more surface level when we were doing that one. And that, I think everybody, we were doing that live in front of everybody over Zoom. And I think everybody saw that and immediately was like, oh, we got to really research, like for sure. And I think that is so much more valuable as a teacher than me giving a grade to things.
Yeah.
People saying like, oh no, I see now why we have to do this. There's a good reason. Like that's like the kind of real world lesson that is like so valuable. So yeah, like we had a bunch of research gaps and like I was the outside guest. And yeah, like after that we pivoted and you became like the sole host and then I became the on mic producer.
Yeah.
And that like skeptic role kind of went to both of us.
Yeah. And then we would start the episodes where just you and I bantering. And then it's like, oh, let's introduce our special guest who's going to talk to us about this font.
Yeah. So there's this little like invitation that leads up to the subject matter, kind of invites you in. And then I think it was just on mic that we started to do they've already been here or they're knocking to get in.
Oh my God.
Like I think that's another like weird comedy bang bang kind of thing that like kind of got in there.
Silly little things.
Yeah.
Where we would just decide like, how do you want to enter the room?
Yeah.
And I
think I had props for some of them.
I feel like we did.
Yeah.
I think, was it Impact? That was our second episode that we filmed or recorded. Sophia Mick acted like she came in through the wall like the Kool-Aid Man.
Yeah, that's right.
And that was just so good.
Yeah, the Kool-Aid Man entrance is definitely one of the all-time greats. And then Sophia just kind of reacting as though, oh yeah, this is just normal.
Yeah, no, it was. I also think the
Kool-Aid Man as straight man.
Kool-Aid Man. And so we did those episodes. We re-recorded Comic Sans, and it was just like so much more natural. But it was also great because all of the like guest hosts that we have, they are good friends, well-known people in the program.
Well, and I think we should talk about that too. Like, so each of those people came from the different production teams that made the episodes.
Yeah,
and
each team would pick out one person that would be the guest host.
And you all got to choose your roles. Like, there were people who didn't want to be on mic, and so they were, writing staff, and there was a kind of like supervising producer that was kind of helping to shape the story and get things on track.
On the Wingdings team, I was on because I also participated in some of the teams, and I did. I was like a research person. But yeah, we had these guest hosts, and because we all knew each other so well, I think it just flowed so well. Like, there wasn't that awkward, like we're just meeting for the first time.
Well, and
like,
I think the rehearsals helped with that.
The rehearsals
too.
helped. Like, we would spend a good 10-20 minutes before episodes just like getting all warmed up.
Yeah, there's a lot of Fontroversy that's on the cutting room floor. Just as there's a lot of this show that's on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, we only spent an hour talking about Hollywood Video before filming this.
We talked about Hollywood Video. We talked about Taylor Swift and her great Capital One commercial where she says no words at all, but was probably paid more than any celebrity ever to be in a commercial.
Yeah.
She just picks out a sweater silently.
Good for her. Yeah, so like there was...
Check cashes.
We had a lot of people on these teams just like doing a ton of different stuff behind the scenes. There was a lot of really good research that went into them. Like, these spreadsheets we have are very expansive. They are.
And there's stuff on them that doesn't make it into the show too.
I wish was possible that we could have done that, but there is so much information on
There's so much. And I think it's also the nature of this kind of show where like you are trying to, there's a weird balance of like conversational rhythm that you're trying to maintain while also like giving the whole story structure. And I think you almost can't see what is unnecessary to that until you are in the conversation.
One of my favorite things on one of these spreadsheets that didn't make it into the it's on the Wingdings episode. It is a copy pasta of a toucan, and it says "La Toucan has arrived." And I know I was looking up copy pastas when doing the research for the episode, and I saw that one and I was like, I have to put it in the spreadsheet.
I'm still kind of amazed that didn't break Google Sheets in some weird way.
I know.
Because Bob, I understand. Bob, our small friend Bob.
Or not Microsoft Bob. Microsoft Bob was Comic Sans.
Yeah, Microsoft Bob. But our YouTube friend Bob, who's also in that outline.
Bob's Army. Yeah, he's just a little guy in there.
He's just a little guy saying hello. But yeah, like that is so much less elaborate than the toucan, which somehow doesn't lose fidelity.
The toucan looks great.
The toucan looks pretty good. There's some weird stuff with it, but it's still certainly legible.
So we did those 4 episodes. I think they all just like surprisingly kind of went off without a hitch.
Well, we recorded them all in batches. It was like kind of our last week of class.
Yeah, we were pushing through a little bit, and
we did 2 a day.
We did 2 a day, and then I feel like it's now time to talk about. We had an episode that did not air.
We did. It was our final episode, which was on the subject of Gil Sands.
Yeah.
And I had kind of talked about this with the class early on. The story of Gil Sands, if you don't know about it, I do want to give a content warning. Yeah. It is Eric Gill, the creator of it, is a pretty horrific guy.
Just truly one of the worst.
And kind of like an actual monster type guy.
Like criminal.
Yeah. I think people are definitely going to look it up after that.
Please be warned.
Like really, truly, like actually.
When we say it's bad, like I don't think people fully understand how bad.
And I think that was something that we realized going into. That was something I think we all felt concerns about going in.
We were like, oh, we need to just not be as goofy this episode because it's such intense subject matter. Like that is an episode we had to beforehand. I had to do a content warning thing for.
Yeah, we recorded a content warning, and then we also did. We started. That was one of the few that we actually retook in. We did it like 30 minutes. Yeah, and then we were like, we need to trash this. Yeah, the whole intro was the wrong
was
tone.
so goofy and weird, and then we were like, oh, this is Gil Sands. Like, we can't do that.
And our on mic person was, I think, a really helpful guiding force in that.
Yeah,
being
absolutely.
Like, oh, actually, I thought I understood this, and then having to say this out loud because like there's not really a way to tell that story without talking about the very serious issues. And I think we want, like, the thing that we were trying to figure out, like, this is a fun show that's very silly. Yeah. But like, can you talk about serious things in it?
Yeah. And I know there's probably a way we could have approached that. And we did talk about, we'll re-record. It was the end of term suddenly.
Yes. And you were about to go out of the country.
I was out of the country for 2 months. And then I get like a message from you while I'm out of the country, like, hey, would we be able to re-record this when you get back? And it just never happened. And I think it was just meant to be like, it was not the right tone because all of our other episodes were pretty lighthearted. They were on fun fonts. Gil Sands just did not fit.
Well, I think it was also that, we were going into that with the rush of like, and I think that was what made that retake really necessary. Yeah. Is like, at that point, we had a really good rapport.
Yes.
And like that, the start of that episode was really fun. And then,
I remember because we were talking about Gil Sands, and that is he was a British designer. Yeah. So we were like, oh, we're on the tube. Yeah. And Hugh Laurie's here, and we talked extensively about the Queen dying. Yeah. So there was like a lot going on, and suddenly it was just like, I don't know if we can publish this.
Yeah, because it's that and I think the thing that we were most sensitive about, and I think you and I talked a lot about this with Aline, who was our on mic reporter for that, is like, we want this to be a light show, but we also don't want it to come across as though we were making fun of this subject matter, which I don't think we ever did.
No,
but
I don't think we did either.
Sometimes trying to mix in even light content with stuff that is that heavy is
can be read as the wrong way.
Yeah, and I think that's the last thing we wanted to do with considering that I think we all were really on the same page about this is a really serious story, and people should not be using Eric Gill's typefaces.
I think that is when we walked into that episode, a lot of them were the other episodes were, let's talk about this font we don't like and maybe why it could be good.
Yeah.
And this one we were like, this is a font a lot of people use. Here's why we shouldn't be using it.
Yeah.
And I don't think we were when talking about the actual subject matter, I do think it was fine. But compared to all the other episodes, it just felt like this kind of weird outlier that didn't quite make sense with the rest.
And I think it took, when I reached out to you in that summer period, I think it took me that long to think of what is the way that we can talk about this? And it's almost
I just don't know.
This is the solution that we sort of landed on is it's this meta conversation about
a retrospective on the class, because it has been 9 months.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Since we recorded our last episode.
Since the little podcast baby was born.
we are in 2024 now. Well, it's
the futuristic year of 2024.
The future is here. And it is 2024. So it's been a lot of time to reflect. And this is the way to talk about it.
This is, and I think it's something that, in framing the show, we probably didn't have space for conversationally, but I think this show we can get into more serious things in, and that's
absolutely
that becomes a vehicle for it too.
Mm-hmm.
So if you really want to be bummed out, but also have it really seared into your mind why you probably shouldn't use Eric Gill's typefaces. You can look up that story, but really be aware that we're not giving that content warning lightly.
No,
it's quite serious.
We're not exaggerating.
Yeah.
We are not exaggerating at all. But I will say, I don't know if I ever really used Gill Sans, but after reading that story, I was like, okay, obviously I'm never using Gill Sans.
Yeah, and I think it was also right after that the BBC switched away from, Gill Sans to BBC Right. There's a new typeface meant to completely replace
And
Gill Sans.
we had a list of replacements. I do remember that. We were if we're telling you not to use Gill Sans, but you like the look of it, here are your other options that are just as good without the gross person attached to them.
And that was, I think, the other weird part is I think we were all going into it with an agenda of none of us like this.
Yeah. And
it breaks the bit too.
It breaks the bit because it's supposed
There's no convincing.
It's supposed to be convincing.
Convincing is the core of this idea.
One or both of us would play the skeptic, oh, I hate that font. And our guest speaker would be like, well, let me tell you about the history and why this is actually a really cool font. But all of the people of those fonts that made them and stuff didn't have as much controversy attached to them.
No, and neither of us felt good because we already knew the story of Gill.
Yeah, it's we can't be the skeptic on the other way, oh, I love Gill Sans. I don't want to say that.
No, we already, that's the problem is we can see through time. We can touch the palimpsest. And neither of us want that curse upon us.
It's probably for the best that one never saw the light. I also think that one just I was so unsure on how to act that episode. Do I be normal?
No, we never figured it out.
No, it was a really weird tone.
Yeah, but I think it was a really important lesson for us in terms of learning the voice of this show and how we want to handle it and what kinds of subject matter feel like they fit and connect with people.
Mm-hmm. And from that episode, I was definitely this is a goofy show.
It's very goofy show.
We are probably just gonna keep it that way.
Yeah. I think speaking of goofy show, I think we should also talk about the name.
Oh, yes.
The name situation. It took a lot of figuring to get to that. We were realizing there's multiple rounds of name choices that we had to go through, and we talked a lot about copyright and trademark.
Yeah,
and
we had to do like we went on the copyright checkers to see what has been copyrighted already.
The USPTO and the state of Oregon.
That was super fascinating to look at. I had a good time learning about that.
That's also such a real world design problem of like, if you are naming something, like a big part of it is just making sure there's not something that already has that name.
Absolutely. So, I mean, honestly, most of these names we came up with, I don't know who would be using that. Because we pitched all these names. Pitch is a strong word because we were on a Zoom call for class.
Yeah, this is a mostly remote class. That's a thing to remember.
Mostly remote class.
The only real. There was one in-person day where I was in
and we were in the
space, and
we were in the science building, or that one across the street.
This weird abandoned building that's across the street from us that I'm sure is also full of rats.
Yeah,
but like
huge, like loud fans.
We did this class kind of as attend anywhere, where you can be on Zoom or you can show up in person. And I think there was a day where you and Milos, our sound major, showed up, and then it was just you, and then no one else ever showed up again.
It was just me, and
it became
like,
clear. Yeah, okay, this is just a Zoom class. But then we did all the recordings in person.
Yeah, and it was presented as hybrid at first, so we did have days where we were just completely on Zoom, and I think this was one of them.
Yeah,
but we were talking names, and people in the Zoom chat were just throwing out everything that came to our brains.
Please tell me, what did you have some particular favorites on this?
I have some particular
list.
favorites that I think we were getting real silly. Down to font, DTF, great.
Which ended up being one of the
favorites.
Sort of game show portion at the end of the pilot. That was going to be one of the titles for that.
Yeah. Focked up funts is very good.
It's bad to hear out loud. I will say that.
Funk it. That one feels awful to say.
Yeah. Discovery was something we talked about with names too, and I think both of those suffer from some real discovery issues for potential audiences.
We also really loved some good rhymes, like font croissant,
font
jaunt, font taunt. This one's good. Font seance. That's not quite a rhyme.
Seance is interesting.
But I'm like, where did that come from? Because it's not like we're bringing a font back from the dead.
Because it really does feel like there has to be, you're making a promise to the audience that you're not going to be able to fulfill. All our guests are not going to be spooky ghosts.
I really like font if you care. I don't know what the idea behind that was, but I just like it.
It feels like something that's a music reference, but not to something I know.
I wouldn't know it either.
Yeah.
Let's see what else
There's so many names in this list.
Fontication's very good. Fontify, fontish. We really were leaning into just like adding font to a word.
Yeah.
Which is then we have instead of Fontroversy, it was Fontroversial.
Fontroversial was
the name.
Yeah, and I think in the room kind of pitched Fontroversy as an alt.
Fonty Python.
Fonty Python really stood out to me when I looked at this bad
one's really
form
good.
Again. Well, of course, there's your classic.
Are we thinking the same one?
Do you want to throw out? This was an actual pitch that.
This was an actual pitch that people.
I think
liked.
we did these in Zoom chat, and then people nominated ones that would go on to this round.
Yes, it is Panera's broccoli cheddar soup, 16 ounce. Also, there are fonts. And I need it to be known, it's Panera's broccoli cheddar soup, parentheses, 16 ounce, parentheses, double parentheses. Also, there are fonts, double parentheses.
So a very clear name that I think really is going to invite people in.
I know for a fact I pitched that.
I believe it. I believe it is the thing.
It's actually not the first time I had made that joke, because I know at the time in A&D, or the term before, in A&D we were playing Quiplash, and I put that in as an answer, and people thought it was funny, and I was like, so this is my joke now. Only Fonts is very good. That was a fan favorite. Only Fonts was a fan favorite.
Yeah,
we really liked that one. Sean Font.
Which really would have, because these names were ones that we were using for that initial pilot, which would have made all the more confusing when I was not in any episodes.
The Font in Our Stars. I really like that one.
That one I do love.
30 Flirty and Fonting.
30 Flirty and Fonting.
That one was very good.
That one made it a long ways. I think that was one of our
because we had
rounds.
The top picks, like 5 of them or something, were the final ones that we chose.
Yeah.
Why the long typeface
why
is
the
the
long
last
typeface?
one on this list. Type snipe. Yeah, you could. I have a feeling these are all by the same person in order: type gripe, type hype, type mic, type snipe.
Yes. One of the students in the class, I seem to recall, generated a list of like 150 names just on their own.
Fantastic. Amazing.
Which we went through as a group to try to find.
Yeah, and obviously it eventually became Fontroversy.
I scrolled back up and noticed family-friendly free fonts with family-friendly and free all hyphenated together, which makes it seem like it's free of family friendliness. Yeah, these are really. I think we landed on a very good name.
I think
for it.
I like the name we ended up with.
Yeah,
these ones are silly, but I feel like the name we have communicates the podcast best.
It does. It is about the discussion of things that are not well liked, and I think that is like kind of the discussion that we wanted to have. How can we make people think about these things through the complex historical lens that they came from? And like also the cultural lens that comes after, because use is a whole different thing.
Yeah, that's
than
where
origin.
we get the episodes like Comic Sans, Impact, Wingdings, all being like, we talked a lot about memes.
Yeah. Well, Impact, especially.
Impact is the meme font. That's where we uncovered some of my great
your
great
Google
old
Plus
memes.
history.
My old memes.
I'm still amazed that I found that meme just from what you described.
I found...
You remembered the wording exactly, which helped.
I was talking about it to a friend recently, and they looked it up, and not only had it been reposted many places, they found it on Pinterest, which is where like all memes go to die.
Yeah. Oh, yes.
I thought that was really funny.
Yeah. So, like, essentially, then the class ends.
The class ends.
And so I go into summer with a bunch of raw audio to edit. And I am also starting up production on a new season of Did I Do That? And I have no time because I'm also trying to move. And I like... a bunch of things all go on at once, but like I also want to shout out like one of the saving graces, a person who was not in the class, Orion Cortez,
yes,
who has worked with Nick Adnew, past guest on this show many a time, but Orion like came to me like kind of like early, I think it was actually late in spring when I had started to realize that I was going to have to cut these all myself. Yeah. And was like, I want to do more audio editing. Can I be like a co-editor?
And Orion is also a student in the graphic design program as well.
Yes, also a student of A&D Projects. And like Orion essentially like came to me early enough that we were able to sit down and like think about the post-production of this show collaboratively. And like a lot of the like kind of soundscape side of Fontroversy came from him, like the sound effects when the Kool-Aid Man breaks in.
Oh, so good.
And I think I forget but there's some in that last episode that he did. Like he did a bunch of sound effects in that one. But like those are all like things that he introduced that were not like on the sheet when I gave him like the outline. No,
Orion is just like an endlessly creative person.
Yeah.
Like he right now is making a video game about giraffes fighting.
Yes, a game from the Panic Playdate platform. Giraffe fighting where you can whip your neck around and fight. You got to get that game when it comes out because it looks really good.
Also, I had never met Orion before when we were doing the podcast or anything. So the first time I interacted with him was in fall term of 2023.
Really?
And when we were in A&D Projects together, and I introduced myself, and he's like, "Yeah, I've only ever heard your voice," and I was like, "Huh?" And he was like, "Yeah, I cut the episodes." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah, so he probably had like 8 hours of listening to your voice.
Yeah, he was like, I've heard plenty of you. Yeah, I don't want any more.
No,
he would not say that.
No, like you two work together really well, and I think like that's the other interesting part is like you're in the room for like 2 hours to record a 1 hour episode, and then you have like 8 hours on the back end in a lot of cases like, to cut it so that it's like. It actually moves, and you're taking out the ums and the ahs and the stuff that needs to be removed for other reasons.
There's also like we hadn't made branding
No.
And
Well, kind of. Like
Robert Ditty. Just like out of nowhere threw together these really great logos for which is what we ended up using for the podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, I feel like we were getting to the end of term, like everyone was just tired.
Yeah. And fair enough, because spring term here,
Spring term is like it's just chaotic.
We're on the quarter system at PSU, and it is a long, you basically go 20 weeks with like a 1 week break in the middle. It's brutal.
Spring term was really brutal. Like that's also when we have all our events going on. We have Be Honest. We have our senior portfolio show.
Our sophomore portfolio
review. Like there's so much. So people were tired, and then Robert threw that in chat one day, and I was like, okay, this is great.
And it was, I think like there was some back and forth about it, but like it was a pretty good representation of like, you know, this is a messy subject, and like trying to unpack the complexity visually.
I'll never get over the V being the wingding's hand with the peace sign. I just think that is so clever.
Yeah, it was a really nice touch to include that. And that's also the little symbol that I use to identify this show in my list is like,
is it really?
Yeah, it's a little peace sign. But yeah, like it was mostly kind of on the fly trying to figure out how to promote it.
Yeah.
Because like the class was over, and you were off.
I was in Europe.
In Europe.
And then we got asked by what was the big convention?
Oh, so I should talk about that.
To do like I don't fully know the details.
So I was approached by Lizzie Gershenson, a past guest of this program, who co-runs Future Fonts, and she was. Future Fonts is so incredible.
They're great.
But she was like organizing a party as part of TypeCon, which is like a big, kind of international type convention. We if you listen to the past episode with me talking like Frasier, that was recorded there. But the initial idea was that we would maybe try to do some sort of live Fontroversy. Yeah. And you were not in the country.
I was not in the country. I was sad.
You were the host of this program, which
I was so sad. You messaged me, and the day that they wanted us to, that was the day I would have been flying back.
Yeah, and you would have been in, even if you had been back like the day before, I think you probably would not have been in any shape.
Jet lag. I was out of it for a while.
Especially in front of a live audience, would be.
I feel like maybe I would have been at my funniest, maybe. Just like a little delirious.
And sometimes that works.
I had just been through the New Jersey airport, and you're not the same when you leave the airport. the Newark, New Jersey airport. You don't walk in the same when you leave.
Yeah, it's a place that changes you.
It's the worst airport I've ever been to.
Really?
It's terrible.
Let's list off our least favorite airports. I'm gonna throw number one out there: Chicago O'Hare, an airport that is circuitous and there's nothing I can eat in it, and it drives Forget this, because I know exactly what my number one is.
Oh, okay.
Terminal 5 Heathrow. Terminal 5 Heathrow is an airport that is brand new. Supposedly it's very fancy, but you get into it and it is incredibly overcrowded.
Okay.
To the point that there's nowhere to sit.
Yuck.
There's nothing. We take for granted the crap that is in American airports, where you can just very quickly get a Dunkin' Donuts or something like that.
I always have to get a bag of peanut M&Ms.
Except for Pret a Manger, there is no quick bites to eat. Only sit down restaurants that are like
Pret a Manger,
$100 for a meal.
Yeah,
and a million stores that are selling luxury handbags and liquor.
Yeah, because I'm going to buy that at an airport.
There are 10 stores for every one place to get food that are selling handbags. It is maddening. I felt like I was going insane both times I went through there.
I haven't been to an airport you said it's in the UK.
It's
I've
London.
been to a train station in the UK, and it was very similar to that. Like no seats. People were just sitting on the floor everywhere. Really overpriced food. Yeah, really overpriced food.
Quality didn't quite match up.
No, I did the bullet train that you do underwater from.
The channel.
I did the channel.
In the channel.
I did the channel. It was cool.
Yeah. Did you have a churro on the channel?
No, I don't think they had food.
Well, they should serve churros because it's sort of train shaped.
Being as it's
and sounds like channel.
It's a train that came from Paris to London. I don't know how they would feel about churros.
Yeah, I guess churro doesn't really factor into the geography of either of those places.
No, Newark is easily the worst airport. I have been to O'Hare. My plane, I was just a connection. But my plane was delayed and I only had a 5-minute layover.
Hey.
So
yeah.
I was at the back of the plane. So getting off, even the flight attendants were like, hey, we've got people with connections. Can you all stay seated so they can get off? Nobody did, of course.
No.
And the guy that was in my row knew I had a connection and he yelled at everybody to sit down.
Yeah.
And they did. Which was very cool. Go him. He was very nice.
I mean, that is actually very helpful.
Yeah. And then I booked it to my gate. I had never been to that airport before. So I was like a little bit lost, but luckily I made it. Got on my plane, tornado hits down. So we're stuck in the runway for like a good 2 hours.
Great. So helpful.
Yeah. So
there's no better place to be stuck in the airport than on the plane.
Yeah.
That's really super comfortable.
Yeah.
I think the first time I went to O'Hare, I was going to a conference in Pittsburgh. And my flights were on opposite ends of the airport.
God.
And so I had to...
It's a big airport.
I had like a 20-minute connection. And I was sprinting. And I feel like I went through like... It was like running through history or something. Because I went through what felt like 10 different airports that had no similar visual styles or cues.
Yeah.
I remember at one point...
Because there are like a bunch of disconnected terminals.
Yeah, I remember at one point, and I was trying to find this when I was there the last time. I remember running up some escalators and past like a car, just like a car that was like on display from a dealership, and being like, what is that doing in here? and then having to like run into this other section of airport that was like, you know, weird and dank and old and musty. And yeah, it just a weird, like surreal experience.
So the moral of the story, don't go to Newark. Don't go to Heathrow.
Yeah. And you know, maybe I know Chicago has multiple airports. Maybe don't go to O'Hare.
There's a different.
Maybe go to Midway. I don't know what that's like.
Yeah, there are two really big ones in Chicago. And it's O'Hare and one other one.
I think it's Midway.
Is it Midway?
Yeah. As a real Chicago head,
you know,
people come to me for my Chicago knowledge. Is this still the show, or have I cut all this out? It's a good question.
But yeah, so that was a thing that was going to happen. Unfortunately, I was not in the country. I would have loved to, but
yeah. So
I was busy.
I think
gallivanting.
You were gallivanting, and that is exactly what you should be doing. But yeah, like I think that sort of brings us to the question of like, what is the future of Fontroversy?
Yeah.
And I know I would love to do more of them. I think
it was just fun.
It is really fun. It is a lot of logistics because I think you kind of do have to have research support ultimately.
It's a lot of work that went in behind the scenes.
Yeah, like I mean, you all put in like probably 8 hours or so of research and writing on each of those scripts.
We had multiple researchers in every single team.
Yeah, bouncing ideas and going back and forth, and then you know, like making sure that the episode is like, you know, like in enough shape that the person who has to read from that outline understands it.
Yeah.
But I want to be able to do more of it, and I think we're exploring some options that are hopefully going to at least make another series possible. Maybe a little longer than the one that we had. Like, we'll see.
Who knows?
We'll see.
I can't read the future.
Nor can I.
Yet.
Speaking of reading the future, though, I think you had prepared a bit.
I have something I am so excited about. Sean, I have a question for you.
Okay.
What's your sign? What's your sign?
Is it part of the bit that I have to give my actual sign, or you already know it?
I already know your sign.
Or is there a cue that I'm supposed to?
Just like share with the people.
Share with I am a Gemini, which I was always told is the bad one.
Everybody thinks all of them are bad.
When I say it.
I do that whenever somebody says they're a Taurus. I don't know what it means. I just do that.
Maybe they're just thinking of the Ford Taurus, the meltiest looking car there is.
So
smooth.
You're a Gemini.
Make it more smooth.
You're a Gemini. I'm a Scorpio. And this is important because I've decided to make horoscopes, font horoscopes.
Font horoscopes.
Yeah. It just felt right. We don't know the future, but we can know what what fonts represent our signs. So I've done it for our sun sign, our moon sign, and our rising sign.
Okay, all right.
And I oh my God, the amount of research I've done. So I need to justify some of my reasoning first.
Please.
So I'll start with you and your sun. You're a sun in Gemini. The urge of self-expression is strong. Often, often interested in collecting information and sharing it. Geminis are flexible and changeable people. Their ability to adapt quickly to new situations gains them plenty of friends and social contacts.
Oh, no.
They're clever and witty, which means, of course,
I joined an improv troupe.
of course, I had to choose this typeface, Karu. It is incredibly wiggly.
Yeah, but could you say the name again? Because I think I was laughing over it.
Karu.
Karu.
Kaeru twice.
Okay.
And it's just like basically illegible.
It's quite the wiggly boy, I will say.
It's very wiggly. It's a lot of worms.
Very, very inconsistent shapes. Very.
I just felt like it was so. What are the words that were defined? Yeah, flexible and changeable, adaptable, and I just thought that made sense. So I'll go over to I'm a Scorpio sun, known for intensity, determination. What else? Prestige. Powerful. So of course for my sun sign, I had to do this kind of fun black letter.
Oh yeah.
This is Amador, and it's just like it's intense.
It feels very serious.
Yeah.
Or it would be on an early 2000s rap album,
or both.
Or both. That's fair.
Yeah. So I just felt like this was only right. Our next two for the moon signs, I learned both of our moons are kind of boring.
Really?
Yeah. So you are a Cancer moon. I am a Libra moon, whatever that means.
What does the moons mean?
You know, I never said I was an expert.
Fair enough.
I just looked it up and then followed what I thought was right.
You just play an expert on TV.
I just play an expert on TV. I'm going to do both of our moons at the same time because they're honestly incredibly similar. Your moon in Cancer, a large potential to get in touch with the feelings and moods of others. Quite wrapped up within themselves. Memories of the past are astounding.
Oh, God. All of those sound pretty bad for me. I'm going to level with you.
So for mine, Libras are warm, moon and Libras are warm, friendly, tasteful, tactful, and balanced.
Pretty good. I think maybe better than mine.
So for both of them, I chose kind of like a fun little sans serif.
Very appropriate.
For Sean is Auster, but I love this font. It's got it's a sans serif, but it's got a lot of curves when you look closely. And then for myself, I've chose New Montreal, which is just very balanced.
Yeah, there's definitely some stroke contrast in Auster.
Auster is a great font.
Yeah.
Shout out to Auster. I think it's very fun.
And Neue Montreal is
that how you say it?
I just say Neue is the German way,
I say
right?
New because
that's what everybody says.
Yeah. New Montreal is actually one of my favorite fonts. I wasn't biased in picking it, but when it said balanced, it's like when I think a good balanced sans serif, I go to New Montreal. I also love all the different weights. Okay, so our last ones are also similar, but I have to do them separately.
Please.
So you are an Aries rising. Oh, God.
I really know what that means.
Whatever that means.
Oh, no, not Aries.
Your first instinct.
He's the god of war, I think, or something.
Yeah, he is.
Oh, good. Then I did learn something from that mythology class I took in 8th grade.
Not Percy Jackson and the Olympians.
That came after me. I didn't.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm a youngin'. What can I say?
Back in my day, we were reading Greek myths and
back in my day, I was
Gawain the Green Knight, which is one of the strangest things to read.
I was friends with Homer back in my day, writer of the Odyssey and the Iliad,
and also father of Bart.
Remember Bart? We were talking about Bart. So you're rising in Aries. Ugh. You know, Aries. Your first instinct is to do rather than think. Planning ahead, forget it. Aries rising simply charges forward without much ado. So for your rising sign, I have decided on Bureau script, which is actually the Corita Kent handwriting font.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's very it just goes.
Yeah.
It just moves. It's kind of illegible. This is actually Bureau script sloppy is the name of it. I thought it was fun. I've used that font. But yeah, that's what I did for you.
Cool.
So for me, I am a Gemini rising. God.
What do the risings? I don't there's know. So many. It's very convoluted, I will say. The sort of horoscope world. I don't mean to criticize.
So I'm a Gemini rising. Gross. They're curious about the people around them. Sounds similar to Sagittarius rising. Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Well, it is, but there are some important differences. Gemini mostly interests themselves in moving about in their social circles.
Oh.
They are people who love to ask questions and move around freely. So for mine, I did Duos brush, which is also kind of a scripty.
It is.
A scripty doodad. So we both got scripties.
Rising is very scripty.
Rising's very scripty, as we learned.
You don't want to type early in the morning.
So
you want to get out a pen. What
we've learned is for our sons, we got 2 kind of like fun header fonts. Our moons are just, boring. And our risings are very scripty.
Well, they're the workhorses. That's the body type.
Yeah, those are the body types.
Yeah, so students, if you're wondering how to do type pairings,
this is how you do it.
This is the episode to listen to of Fontroversy.
I'm incredible.
Teaches you about type pairings.
I'm an incredible type designer. Solely based on this.
You just need to find out your project's sun, moon, and rising.
Yeah. There you go.
When is your project going to be born?
So I spent too long on this, and I'm not sad about it.
No, you did great. I love this.
I just was so determined to do this going in. I spent a long time at work sitting with my coworkers, like going through every font and being like, does this work? No. Don't tell my boss.
Lena, do you have anything that you want to plug?
I'm going to graduate. Hire me.
Do you want people to follow you on Instagram?
Oh yeah, that'd probably be smart.
Lena, where can people find you if they want to give you a follow?
You can find me on Instagram at ps.its.lena. PS like Photoshop also PS like, oh, PS it's me.
And if they want to see your Illustrator content, they can go to AI. Although that's also where you can find artificial intelligence about you.
I was going to do the AI one because I actually don't use Photoshop that much. But I think it was taken, or it just didn't flow it didn't flow as well. So yeah, that's where I put all my designs. If I remember, I have that Instagram, which I don't really ever.
Most people don't these days, I feel like. That's why I'm choosing to believe that I'm getting less and less traction on those platforms and not that I've stopped paying money to Mark Zuckerberg and his friends.
Did you pay?
Oh, yes.
Oh, wow.
Oh, yes. It's a pay-to-play platform these days.
Dang.
Yes. Don't pay Mark Zuckerberg. He's already very rich, and
he doesn't need
now
more.
He can fight you, and I hate it.
What?
Oh, you don't know? You don't know about Mark? Mark is very ripped now, and he's decided that he's going to become an MMA fighter. To the point that they've had to
maybe they'll knock something in his brain that'll make him normal.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Because they've actually had to issue a public warning to investors that Mark Zuckerberg now does daring stunts and might be injured. And it would affect his ability to perform.
Maybe they'll knock something in his
Facebook.
head that will make him decide to give everybody money.
I'm nervous about even how that would go, considering that the last time that he had a great, brilliant idea was introducing news to Facebook, which sort of broke democracy.
Yeah.
So that was cool. I loved that. I loved that when he decided that we all needed to talk about news and that news would be prioritized. And it didn't matter where it was from.
I think we should just switch out Mark Zuckerberg with Jesse Eisenberg.
Just make Jesse Eisenberg. You know what? We have not yet come up with our 2024 goal for this show. I feel like that's often a thing that podcasts will do at the start of the year.
2024
our 2024 goal is replace Mark Zuckerberg with Jesse Eisenberg.
With this podcast?
I think it's an achievable goal. Last year we were trying to make LinkedIn weird again, and I think we did it. So this year it's going to be replacing Mark Zuckerberg with Jesse Eisenberg.
I'd be okay with that.
Yeah.
I like Jesse Eisenberg. He's in movies.
He seems nice. I will say that. And
what's a
look
movie
forward to finding out how I'm wrong about that.
Now You See Me?
Now You See Me Too as well.
Now You See Me Too as well.
Did that movie series get that name specifically because they wanted to do a sequel called Now You See Me Too? Because there's no reason to call the first movie Now You See Me.
Well, it's like Now You See Me, Now You Don't. We're magicians.
I guess.
Are those guys wizards?
I think that's the bit, is that the magic that they're doing is real,
I think
even
it's real
though
magic.
they're
Woody Harrelson's
magicians.
character has got to be an actual wizard. There's no reasonable way he should have been able to do the things that he did.
I think that has to be it. But yeah.
I actually really like that movie.
If it's not, then TM, we own that. Maybe that's how we fund the next series of Fontroversy.
Jesse Eisenberg? We're big fans of him here.
I think we have to close the show because this recording is now over 2 hours by a large margin. Well, thank you so much for being here, Lena.
It's great to be back.
Or Kristen, as it says in my copy.
That's my sister-in-law's name.
Was your sister-in-law secretly on the call with us? Like how we did all those Fontroversy episodes live streamed? Is there just a Zoom on your computer with like 1 million of your family members on it?
Yeah, all of them.
Yeah.
Including my dog.
Mostly cameras off.
Mostly my dog.
Yeah. But yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. And also, hey, if you're listening to this, thank you for listening to this show and hopefully also listening to Fontroversy because we worked really hard on it. If you like this show, whether you're new to it or not, please give us a follow. Subscribe on your podcast player of choice. You can subscribe to our feed here at Did I Do That? Or the Fontroversy feed if you haven't done that already. And I think this episode will probably be going into both. So you'll be able to hear it no matter where you get the show. But you already know that because you're listening to the show. And also, you know, if you want to find this show, you can get to it by searching for the show's title. And I'm going to keep that ambiguous because it can be true of either one. But you can find both of them on the Did I Do That website. That's dididothat.design. There you can find some good images that go along with each and every episode. And you can also get those delivered directly to you on Instagram if you give us a follow there. So I am Sean Schumacher. This has been the big Did I Do That Fontroversy crossover. And as we always say at the end of every Did I Do That Fontroversy crossover episode,
we're sorry.
that covers a lot of business. All right. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Bye.
I'm a raptor. We'll talk about things that have happened since the show. When the show went out, you were in Europe.
When the show went out, I was in Europe.
You were out of the United States entirely.
For like almost 2 months.
Yeah.
I was just gone.
I don't think any episodes went out while you were in the country.
I don't think. And it was really fun because my travel crew that I was with, I'd be like, "Oh yeah, I have a new podcast episode," and I'm also realizing like I just met these people, and they'd be like, "You have a podcast?"
It was for a design class. Does that make any more sense? No. Yeah, it's
what a crazy thing.
The amazing thing to see. The cars are built to wonders.